The silence in the archives. The moon of Seraph 9 circled a gentle blue world and held the largest archive in known space in cold halls, where light walked like a patient librarian. The junior keeper named Sella moved through the stacks with an eye, card and a pulse reader and the satisfaction of a quiet day. She liked the hum of the data pillars and the faint taste of copper in the air that meant the memory crystals were busy. The archive made sense when the rest of the galaxy did not. The empire outside named itself Harmony, but Sella had seen how harmony was often the sound of things nailed down. A request arrived from a remote consulate asking for casualty graphs from the border fire 211 years ago. Simple work. She keyed the query and waited for the blossom of figures and maps. Instead, she saw a stutter. A whole sector line returned as complete records, yet each chart carried the same clean wound, a gap shaped like a missing planet. No notice of removal, no reference tag, no clerical stamp, just lines that should have been jagged and loud, turned to a glassy calm. Sela frowned and ran a deeper check. The system labeled the whole Anthropos null, and then flashed a friendly warning. Her clearance did not include cultural myths. She almost laughed. The archive did not keep myths, it kept evidence. She began the slow dance of a careful worker sliding through cross-references to see where the whole echoed. She found the name in convoy logs where ships listed a hard escort of unknown classification. She found it in hospital reports where triage times fell to a fraction, as if an unseen hand moved the wounded before the alarms rung. She found it in treaty minutes where a delegate asked a soft question about an extinct partner, and the question went missing from the transcript. The gap had weight. She could feel it press on her skin. Sella marked the request as delayed and placed a courtesy call to the consulate, using a harmless reason about re-indexing. Then she took the risk that would define her life. She walked past rows of quiet pillars to a door that most people never saw. The door led to analog stacks. Old paper coils and mineral plates sat in dust, because Harmony favored the clean order of crystals. She loved this room because it smelled of stone and time. She pulled a drawer and found a thin slate labeled in the old tongue of a forgotten client, People of Earth, Emergency Charter. She knew the word Earth because it appeared in the myth catalog as a place that never was a story, told to frighten children who asked where monsters learned to be brave. Her fingers shook, but her voice stayed calm as she read. The charter spoke of a plan named Project Shepherd. It spoke of convoys that moved in the dark and of a pledge taken by humans to step away from the center of everything for the sake of everyone. It did not say they died. It did not say they were weak. It said they chose to be absent, so others would learn to stand. She felt the idea hit her chest like a new gravity. The myth was not a myth. The gap was a door, and someone had painted the door to look like the wall. The archive lights dimmed for evening, and she closed the drawer because she was not foolish. She went to the canteen and ate a bowl of grain stew while the other keepers talked softly about football matches and a new tax. Sella listened to the surface of their lives and thought of the word shepherd. She thought of the graphs made smooth by a hand that wanted every voice to sound the same. People called that peace. She knew better. Peace was the shape of many songs sung without fear. When she returned to her desk, a man waited in the shadows near her pillar. He wore the gray travel coat of a spacer and the tired eyes of someone who had spent too long watching exits. He introduced himself as Cade, a chartless navigator of no guild. He spoke with respect and an old rhythm, and he did not look at the cameras. Sela kept her voice even and asked how she could help. He said he had once learned from a teacher who called herself Terran and who told her students to fear truth only when they meant to betray it. He said he could not find her anymore because every record of her was gone. He asked Sela if the archive kept them missing or only the approved. Sela studied him and made her choice. She told him the archive kept both, but the missing moved slower and bit harder. He smiled with one corner of his mouth, and she understood that. He had already chosen his own road. He placed a small device on her table and asked if she knew how to read harmonic drift maps. She did. The device drew a line through star noise and ended near a dead coordinate flagged as Storyland, where the map program put its fairy tales. The line matched a whisper she had seen in freight manifests. It matched a different kind of gap alarms, kept quiet by habit, until someone meant to make them loud. Sela watched the indicator for security and saw it pulse. Yellow. The Harmony office had noticed the delayed response to the border fire request, and the old drawer accessed by a junior keeper cameras would aim. Doors would lock, and a list of permitted questions would close around her like a collar. I told Cade they had 3 minutes and not a breath more. He did not run. He walked beside her as if they were still in a library, and even the floor respected that calm. They reached a maintenance lift that never reported its rides because it did not believe in gossip. Sela loved that lift. She keyed a manual code and listened to the sound of cables. They moved down to the tram tunnels where the air smelled of oil and rain, though rain never fell here. Cade asked why she cared, and she told him. The truth, she hated the taste of clean lies more than the taste of real trouble. He nodded as if that answer matched his map. The tram slid out into black rock streaked with the glow of safety paint, and then into a shaft of glass that showed the quiet planet below. Sela looked at that gentle world and felt no safety. The archive had taught her many things. One lesson was simple. Holes are not nothing. Holes are where something lives. She gripped the device with the drift line to the mythic coordinate and felt the shape of the story inside it. She did not know then that the story would leave marks on every border and every oath. She knew only this. A galaxy had been told that humans never existed, and the galaxy had believed it because belief is easy when it costs nothing. She was about to make belief expensive. The silence in the archives. The moon of Seraph 9 circled a blue world and carried the largest archive in the known galaxy. Its endless halls were filled with cold light and towers of memory crystals that hummed softly with the weight of countless histories. Sela, a junior keeper, moved quietly between the stacks, guiding a cart of data pillars and humming to herself. She loved this place because it was orderly and calm, far from the noise of the streets above where the Empire of Harmony demanded smiles while hiding fists. Behind these walls, everything obeyed. Rules. Data answered truthfully, and lies were harder to breathe. On this day, a request came from a distant consulate for casualty figures from the border fire 211 years ago. A simple task. She keyed the command and waited for the blossom of graphs to appear. Instead, the record stuttered, and a gap appeared on the screen. The figures looked perfect until one saw the same clean hole cut through every report, a whole sector line erased as if it had never been. Real war records were jagged and ugly with peaks of terror and valleys of exhaustion. But these looked like glass. Someone had smoothed every crack. Sela frowned. She ran deeper checks and found the same pattern in transport manifests where a mysterious escort of unknown ships was redacted. She found it in hospital files where wounded soldiers were recorded as moved before alarms had sounded. She even found it in the minutes of a treaty meeting where a delegate had asked about a vanished ally, only for the entire question to vanish from the official transcript. The archive labeled the whole Anthropos null and added a cheerful note that her clearance did not cover cultural myths. She almost laughed. The archive did not keep myths, it kept evidence. She marked the request as delayed and sent back a safe explanation. Then she made a choice. She walked to the analog stacks, a room few visited because it smelled of dust and stone rather than polished crystal. Here old plates and coils were stored because Harmony preferred its past neat and easy to erase. She slid open a drawer and read the title etched in the old tongue, People of Earth Emergency Charter. The word Earth stirred something. She remembered it from the myth catalog, a story told to children about a place that had never been where monsters learned how to be brave. She read further, and her breath caught. The charter spoke of Project Shepherd, of convoys that carried humanity away from the stage of the galaxy, not because they were weak, but because they chose to step aside for others to grow. They had not died. They had hidden themselves. Sela closed the drawer slowly because the weight of this truth was heavy. If this was real, then every gap, every silence in the records was a door painted to look like a wall. She went to the canteen and sat with a bowl of stew. The other keepers chatted about sports and new taxes. She listened and said little. Her mind echoed with the word shepherd. Peace was not the smooth silence Harmony called order. Peace was the sound of many voices singing without fear. When she returned to her desk, a man was waiting. He stood in the shadows near her pillar wearing a gray spacer coat and the tired eyes of one who had stared too long at exits. He introduced himself as Cade, a chartless navigator of no guild. He spoke softly with the rhythm of old speech and asked her a strange question. He had once studied under a teacher who called herself Terran and who taught that truth was only dangerous when someone planned to betray it. He could not find her anymore because every trace of her had been erased. He asked if the archive kept the missing or only the approved. Sela studied him and answered carefully. The archive kept both, but the missing took longer to find. He smiled faintly and placed a device on her desk. It projected a harmonic drift map with a line that led toward a dead coordinate labeled as Storyland, a place the cartographers mocked as fairy tale. She recognized the path. It matched the whispers she had seen in erased freight records. The gap had a destination. A yellow light pulsed on her console. The office of Harmony had noticed her delay, and the drawer she had opened. Security doors would soon lock, and guards would come. Cameras would sharpen their gaze. She told Cade they had 3 minutes and not a breath more. He did not panic. He walked with her as if they still strolled in a library, and the floor itself respected that calm. They entered a maintenance lift that never reported its rides. Sela keyed an old manual code, and the cables groaned, carrying them down to tram tunnels. The air smelled of oil and metal rain, though rain never fell here. Cade asked why she cared so much. She answered honestly. She hated the taste of clean lies more than the taste of real trouble. He nodded as if he already knew. The tram slid through rock and then into a glass shaft where the planet shone below. Sela looked at that world and felt no safety. The archive had taught her that holes are not nothing. Holes are where something waits. She gripped the device with the map to the mythic coordinate and felt the story stirring inside it. The galaxy had been told that humans never existed, and everyone had believed because belief is cheap. She was about to make belief expensive. The drift of forgotten stars. The tram rattled through the tunnels and carried them toward the outer port of Seraph 9, where the small ships clung like barnacles to the skin of the moon. Sela felt the weight of every second pressing on her shoulders, because she knew the Harmony office would already be tracing her access. The archive did not forgive curiosity, not when it came to myths that were never supposed to be touched. Cade sat beside her silent for long stretches, and she could sense that. His calm was born from long years of running rather than ignorance of danger. He carried himself like someone who had lost much yet refused to kneel under the loss. She wanted to ask about his teacher, the woman who called herself Terran, but the words tangled in her mouth because she did not know how to begin. At the port, the smell of ion fuel and recycled air hit her at once. 1,000 different vessels crowded the hangars, each painted in the colors of merchant houses, guilds, and wandering captains. The noise of departure announcements blended with the chatter of crews rushing to load their goods. Cade moved with practiced ease through the crowd, leading her toward a narrow bay where an old star courier rested. Its hull was scratched, with the scars of decades of travel, but its eyes still glowed with readiness. Sela hesitated. She had never left the archive for more than short postings. She had never looked at the galaxy without a wall of data between herself and the stars inside. The ship, the walls hummed with quiet power and the lights flickered in patterns of old code that only Cade seemed to understand. He powered the vessel and set coordinates, guided by the harmonic drift map. The moment they cleared the docking clamps, Sela felt the strange mixture of terror and freedom that came when gravity gave way to the steady pull of engines. The stars stretched before her, vast and sharp, like endless questions waiting for answers. Cade handed her a small console linked to the map. He asked her to read the drift and tell him if she saw the same things he did. The lines curved in elegant arcs, always returning to the same gap in the star charts, a place erased by decree. She whispered the name Anthropos Null, and Cade nodded. He told her the first story of his life as a navigator. He had flown under charter for a guild that specialized in dangerous runs. The guild had been contracted once to escort a convoy of ships carrying nothing but sealed containers. They were forbidden to scan them or even look too closely. But he had felt the hand of guidance pushing his ship in ways no normal fleet could achieve. He had seen lights flicker in patterns that whispered of unseen escorts, and once in a storm of ion fire he had glimpsed a vessel move faster than any known drive. He believed those escorts were the hidden hand of the vanished species, the ones the Empire now claimed never existed. Sela listened and felt her heart beat in strange rhythm because she knew the records she had read and his memories were not separate. They were pieces of the same shape. As the courier pushed deeper into quiet lanes, the ship sensors picked up patrol echoes. A Harmony cruiser loomed on their path, its hull sharp and bright with the emblem of enforced peace. The cruiser hailed them, demanding identification and cargo. Sela felt panic rising, but Cade only smiled thinly and altered their drift. He used minor gravitational wells to slip them into a dark corridor. Between star lanes, the cruiser searched but passed without finding them. Sela asked how long they could keep evading, and Cade answered that truth had a way of pulling pursuers tighter than gravity. The more they chased, the faster it would come. They reached a field of broken satellites, the graveyard of an old communication array. The debris shimmered in pale light, spinning endlessly in silence. Sela checked the map and found the harmonic drift pointed straight through the graveyard Cade threaded. The courier with careful hands while fragments of ancient metal spun past like ghosts. One shard carried a mark that made Sela freeze. It bore the symbol she had seen in the old drawer, a circle with 3 lines stretching outward, the sign of the Shepherd Charter. She touched the console with reverence as the shard vanished behind them. The galaxy had tried to erase humans, but their fingerprints clung to places nobody thought to look. Beyond the graveyard, they found calm space where a station hung cloaked in shadow. Its surface blended with the background of stars as if it wanted to be invisible. The map flickered and confirmed the destination. Cade slowed the courier and brought them closer. The station stirred with faint light patterns, like an eye-opening after centuries of sleep. A voice spoke not in sound but in pressure inside their minds, demanding intent. Sela felt her skin crawl. She answered aloud that she sought the truth of the missing people. She sought the reason for the silence. The voice paused, and then the station allowed them entry. The courier docked inside a hollow bay, filled with dust and forgotten machinery. The walls were lined with symbols Sela did not recognize, yet felt in her bones. She stepped onto the deck and breathed air that tasted old but alive. The silence was heavy yet filled with promise. Cade looked at her with eyes that reflected both fear and hope. They had found something that should not exist. They had crossed the line between myth and fact. The galaxy said humans never existed yet. Here stood a station built by hands that refused to be forgotten. Sela touched the wall and whispered to herself that lies could never smother truth forever. The sentinel of the station. The air. Inside the hidden station was thin and cool, as though it had been waiting for them all along. Sela walked with careful steps, her eyes drawn to the faint glow that moved along the walls, like veins of light, carrying old memory. The floor echoed beneath. Her boots and the sound reminded her that this was not a myth. This was solid and real. Cade kept a steady hand near the grip of his sidearm, not because he thought it would help, but because habit was a comfort in unknown places. They moved together, through the corridors where dust swirled around their footsteps and the silence pressed like a question waiting for an answer. At the heart of the station stood a chamber with a sphere suspended in the center. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, and patterns of constellations shimmered across it. A pulse of light spread outward and filled the chamber. The sphere spoke without sound. The voice was inside their thoughts, and it asked who they were and why they had come. Sela felt her knees weaken. She introduced herself as a keeper of archives sworn to preserve truth. Cade gave his name and title of navigator without guild. The sphere listened, and then demanded intent in harsher tones. Why had they sought the forbidden name? Why did they chase the drift of forgotten stars? Sela steadied her breath and said they were looking for the people called human. She spoke of the erased records, the broken graphs, the missing names. She said she did not believe that silence was truth, and that she needed to know what had been taken. The sphere pulsed brighter and the chamber trembled as if it weighed her words. It spoke again, telling them that many came before seeking power or weapons, but none were worthy. It said the humans had left guardians behind not to keep others away but to test whether curiosity was born of greed or of need. The walls of the chamber shifted into new forms, and suddenly the room was a maze of illusions. The floor stretched into impossible bridges, and the air thickened into storms. Selah felt herself stumble, but Cade caught her arm and told her not to trust her eyes. The test was not of strength, but of clarity. They had to walk forward together, with faith in one another rather than in the tricks around them. Selah gripped the device that had led them here, and kept her eyes on the faint line of drift that still hummed within it. Step by step, they moved through the maze, ignoring the storm, winds ignoring the false drops, ignoring the shadows that whispered doubts. When they reached the center again, the illusions fell away. The sphere pulsed with new warmth and declared them proven. It spoke of the legacy of the humans and how they had chosen to step away from the galaxy not in defeat, but in deliberate silence. They had watched the rise of empires and seen that their presence distorted growth. They had been too strong, too adaptable, too dangerous to remain without unbalancing the scales. So they chose exile, not death. They built stations like this to hold fragments of memory and to guard the key called the witness seed. The chamber shifted again, and a pedestal rose from the floor, holding a crystal seed that shimmered with layers of light. The sentinel said this was the key to awakening the greater memory of humanity, but warned them that carrying it would mark them as hunted. The empires had built their peace upon the lie that humans never were. If the lie shattered, so too would the order built upon it. The witness seed could not be hidden, once claimed. Cade looked at Selah with eyes that weighed both fear and duty. He asked if she was ready to carry such a burden. Selah felt the ache in her chest, but she nodded. She had lived too long among records twisted by silence, and she could no longer live knowing she had turned away from truth. She reached for the crystal, and when her fingers closed around it, a surge of visions struck her mind. She saw fields of green and oceans of blue. She saw people running, laughing, fighting, dreaming. She saw worlds lit by human colonies, blazing like stars, and then dimming as the choice was made to vanish. She gasped and staggered, but she did not let go. The sentinel's voice filled the chamber, declaring that the seed was now bound to her. It said she was free to leave, but she would never be unseen again. Every hunter who feared truth would come to silence her. She felt the weight settle into her bones, yet alongside the fear came strength. Cade placed a steady hand on her shoulder, reminding her she was not alone. Together they turned toward the docking bay. The courier waited, but beyond its hull lay an empire that had built walls of lies high and strong. They now carried a spark that could set those walls aflame. As they left the station, Selah looked back one last time. The sphere dimmed, but not into sleep. It watched them go, as if pleased. The humans had stepped aside, but not forever. The galaxy believed. They never existed, but the truth was waking, and with it came a storm. No lie could hold back. Memories in the seed. The courier slid away from the hidden station and back into the lanes of cold space. Yet inside the small cabin, the silence was not. Empty. Selah sat in her chair with the witness seed cradled in her hands. Its light pulsed softly like a heart, and each beat carried whispers of images that were not her own. She closed her eyes and saw flashes of a green world where rivers ran wide, and skies blazed with storms of thunder. She saw cities rising with steel and glass, and people who walked with fire in their eyes and laughter in their voices. The visions came not as stories, but as living fragments pressing into her thoughts. She knew these were the memories of humans preserved for the day. Someone was ready to see. Cade flew the ship with steady hands, but his eyes flickered to her often. He asked what she saw, and she tried to describe the flood of sensations she spoke of, the sound of drums and the taste of rain and the echo of voices speaking languages she did not know yet somehow understood. He listened with the patience of a man who believed not in maps, but in journeys. He told her that long ago he had dreamed of such sights, though he never knew their source, and now hearing her words he realized that the dreams must have been ripples leaking from the seed. The calm of the moment broke when the sensors flared with warnings. A Harmony patrol ship had locked on them, demanding identification and surrender. Cade cursed softly and twisted the controls. The courier dove through a belt of frozen rock shards as the patrol opened fire. Light spears cut across the darkness, striking fragments into dust. Sela gripped the console and tried to steady her breath. She asked if they could escape, and Cade answered with grim certainty that escape was not enough. The patrol would call reinforcements. The Empire had already guessed what they carried. He pushed the courier into the heart of the belt, weaving between tumbling stones while shards scraped the hull. Sparks lit the cabin and alarms wailed. Sela felt fear claw at her, yet the witness seed pulsed brighter as though urging her not to yield, and pressed it to her chest and felt strength flow like a river. The visions sharpened and she saw warriors in ancient armor holding the line against impossible odds. She saw explorers pushing fragile ships into storms. She saw healers binding wounds, even when the war roared around them. She realized the seed was not just memory, it was guidance. A reminder of what humans had endured and overcome. Cade managed to lose the patrol by slipping into a gravity well at the edge of the belt. The courier rattled and screamed, yet held together. They burst into calmer space, but both knew they had little time. Sela looked at him and asked where the seed must go. He explained that the only place powerful enough to carry truth into every corner of the IA galaxy was the conclave, the great council where every major empire gathered. Yet to reach it, they would have to cross half the stars, hunted by fleets and assassins. The task was nearly impossible, but Sela felt no choice. She said truth demanded the risk. They landed briefly on a hidden outpost carved into an asteroid to refuel and gather supplies. The traders there dealt in shadows and asked no questions, but even in their wary glances, Sela sensed suspicion. The seed glowed faintly under her cloak, and she wondered if the whole galaxy could somehow feel its presence. As they left, a child of some reptilian race stared at her with wide eyes and whispered the word human in a tongue she did not know. She froze because the child should not have known that word. Yet the sound carried weight like an echo older than memory. Back on the courier, Cade spoke quietly of the cost they were about to face. He said Harmony would not allow the conclave to hear them without silencing them first. The Empire had built its power on the lie that humans never existed. If the lie shattered, then all the debts and crimes hidden beneath would surface. He warned her that friends would become enemies, and that every ally might betray them for the reward. Sela listened and felt the fear rise, but she also remembered the visions of strength. She told him that if humans could choose exile for the sake of others, then she could face danger for the sake of truth. The courier launched again and drifted into the deeper dark stars swirled across the window like scattered embers. Sela held the witness seed close, feeling its rhythm match her heartbeat. The galaxy outside believed in silence, but silence was brittle. She whispered to herself that walls of lies were tall, yet they cracked the moment someone dared to lean against them. The seed pulsed in her hands as if agreeing. Their path was uncertain, but every step forward carried the weight of voices that refused to stay buried, the weight of pursuit. The courier moved through the long dark between systems, chasing the hidden paths that Cade traced on his maps, and every moment felt like a coin flipped between survival and capture. Sela kept the witness seed wrapped in cloth, but its glow still seeped through, faint and steady as if it wanted to be seen. She could not escape the sense that the galaxy itself was listening and waiting for her to stumble. They had crossed into the trade lanes of the inner empires now, where Harmony's grip was iron, and every port watched with 1,000 suspicious eyes. Cade adjusted their course through a corridor of merchant convoys, hoping the crowded lanes would shield them from detection. But the screen soon showed the sharp lines of pursuing vessels. These were not patrol craft now, but hunters, their hulls dark and built for speed. They did not broadcast codes because they did not need to. Everyone knew what they were, shadows hired to erase mistakes. Sela asked if they could outrun them, but Cade shook his head. The courier was fast, but not fast enough to escape ships designed for one purpose. He said the only chance was to vanish into the chaos of a major port and slip away before the hunters closed the net. They entered the orbit. A Vela Prime, a swollen station world where trade guilds and thieves mingled in equal measure. The port stretched like a ring of fire around the planet, its lights blazing against the void. Cade guided the courier into the docks and cut the engines. Sela felt the change at once. Inside the station, the air was thick with the scent of fuel spices and sweat. Voices rose in dozens of languages and machines clattered as cargo passed through endless gates. Here anonymity was possible, but only for those quick enough to seize it. They stepped into the flow of the crowd, keeping their movements calm. Sela pulled her hood close while Cade kept one hand near his concealed weapon. She felt the witness seed thrum against her side, and she feared its glow would draw every gaze. Yet the crowd moved around them unaware until a flicker of recognition came from a pair of guild enforcers who lingered too long staring. Their eyes shifted toward their comms, and Sela knew the hunt was already reaching into the station. Cade led her through winding corridors to a forgotten sector of the docks where old freight tunnels had been abandoned. He explained that smugglers sometimes use these to move contraband past the guilds, and with luck they could borrow the paths, long enough to escape. They moved quickly past rusting gates and flickering lights until they reached a chamber where shadows gathered around a fire barrel. Half a dozen figures stood there watching with sharp suspicion. These were outlaws, dressed in patched armor with faces marked by years of survival. One of them stepped forward and demanded payment for passage. Sela's hand went instinctively to the seed hidden under her cloak, but Cade caught her wrist and shook his head. He produced a strip of credits instead and offered it calmly. The outlaw leader studied him and then studied her. His eyes narrowed as though he sensed something heavier than money hanging between them. He accepted the payment, but warned that strange things carried. Through his tunnels always left scars. Sela did not answer because she could not. She felt the weight of the seed growing heavier as though it disliked secrecy. The tunnels led them back to the outer edge of the station, where they found a small shuttle. For hire. They boarded quickly and told the pilot to take them to the far reaches of the sector. The man grumbled but set the course. As the shuttle broke free of the port, the alarms of pursuit rang again on their scanners. The hunters had followed their trail, and now dark ships poured from the orbit like wolves. The pilot cursed and veered wildly, but the hunters closed with precision. Sela gripped the seed and whispered a plea for guidance. At once, visions poured into her mind again. She saw human fleets fighting battles against impossible odds. She saw them outnumbered, yet never broken. She saw them sacrificing ships to shield colonies and diving into fires to carry the weak away. The message was clear. Humanity had never believed in surrender. The seed was telling her that truth was worth the cost. She cried out to Cade and told him to hold steady no matter what. The shuttle trembled under fire, and the pilot screamed that they would be destroyed. Cade seized control of the helm and forced the shuttle into a nearby debris field, broken remnants of a war long forgotten. The hunters followed, but their speed betrayed them. One struck a fragment and shattered. Another fired blindly and ignited a chain of explosions among the wrecks. In the chaos, Cade twisted the shuttle through narrow cracks until only silence remained. When they emerged, the stars ahead were clear for a moment, and Sela breathed hard with relief. Yet her heart did not lighten, because she knew this was only one battle of many. The witness seed pulsed with new urgency, as if it understood that the longer they carried it, the louder the galaxy would scream. She turned to Cade and said they had to reach the conclave quickly before every shadow in the Empire closed around them. He nodded and charted a new course. Their path was fragile. Their time was short, and the truth they carried was heavier than any fleet. The voice. Before the conclave, the journey to the conclave stretched across sectors that pulsed with the banners of harmony, and every system they passed through reminded Sela how deep the lie had been planted. Whole worlds lived under the belief that humans were nothing more than myth, and the more she carried the witness seed, the more she felt the fragile silence holding everything together. The courier moved carefully, now cloaked by shadows of trade routes and guided by Cade's instinct for hidden paths. Yet still every port and every frequency echoed with news of A hunt for fugitives carrying forbidden knowledge, Sela knew those words meant her. The conclave was held on Oralis, a vast station that drifted within a nebula, where the colors of light never settled. The station itself was ancient, older than most. Empires and shaped like a crown with spires reaching out in all directions. It was said that no lie could survive long within its walls, because every empire watched the others too closely to allow falsehoods to remain unchallenged. Sela felt the weight of that promise as the courier approached. The nebula shimmered around them like an endless ocean of fire and shadow. Cade docked the ship under a false charter and warned her that once she stepped inside the conclave, there would be no retreat. Halls of Oralis were filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Tall crystalline delegates walked beside scaled warriors and insectoid envoys whose voices clicked like storms. The air was thick with tension because every empire fought. With words here while pretending to bow to unity, Sela walked with her hood low, but the witness seed pulsed stronger now, its glow seeping through the cloth as though it longed to be seen. Delegates turned their heads briefly, sensing something unusual, though none spoke. She and Cade moved toward the central chamber where decisions were announced and records sealed. Inside the chamber, 1,000 seats encircled the dais where only those granted the floor could speak. The sound of debates thundered. In waves as empires accused one another of deceit and betrayal, Sela's heart pounded. She was no orator, no politician. She was a keeper of archives, a woman who loved quiet halls and ordered records. Yet the seed burned in her hands, and she knew she could not remain silent. She stepped forward, and her voice cut through the noise, announcing that she bore testimony of a truth erased. She declared that the species called human had not only existed, but had chosen silence to save the galaxy. From their shadow, the chamber erupted with chaos. Some laughed and called her mad. Others shouted accusations at Harmony for planting tricks. Some demanded proof, and others demanded silence. Guards moved to seize her, but before they could, the witness, seed flared with blinding light and visions poured across the chamber. Every delegate saw what she had seen: fields of green, oceans of storms, ships blazing against impossible odds, humanity enduring not as myth but as reality. The chamber fell into shocked silence as the visions shifted, showing the record of exile, the choice of humans to step away so others might grow. Yet even as the truth burned across their minds, Harmony's representatives rose in fury. They called her a deceiver. They accused her of planting illusions. They claimed the seed was a weapon forged to divide. They produced forged evidence, showing supposed human wrecks dismantled centuries ago to prove extinction. They demanded the council reject her and seal the records. Once more, Sela felt despair clawing at her throat because the tide of voices turned swiftly against her. The guards drew closer, and Cade reached for his weapon, though he knew it would not save them here. Then the seed pulsed again, stronger than before, and the vision shifted not to the past but to the present. On a distant colony that very moment, Harmony's fleet was crushing a rebellion, and the humans intervened. A hidden ship appeared above the colony, sky a vessel black and fierce, unlike anything seen for centuries. It moved with impossible speed, cutting through Harmony's fleet, not to destroy but to shield the weak. It broadcast a message across frequencies telling the galaxy that humans had not vanished. They had only waited. The chamber of the conclave trembled with gasps and cries as live reports flooded in, confirming what the seed showed. No forgery could match real-time broadcasts. No illusion could replace the screams and cheers echoing from the colony. Delegates rose from their seats, demanding answers from Harmony, accusing them of centuries of lies. The empire that had built its power on silence found itself cornered. The guards who had moved to seize Sela froze uncertain. She stood on the dais with the seed, glowing like a second sun, and felt the weight of history. Cade placed his hand on her shoulder, whispering that the truth had finally broken the wall. The galaxy could no longer deny the existence of humanity, and Harmony's foundation was cracking. Under the pressure, Sela looked out across the chamber and saw fear and hope colliding in equal measure. She raised the seed and spoke not as an archivist, but as a witness. She told them that truth was not a weapon to divide, but a torch to guide. and that humanity had stepped aside not to vanish but to give others the chance to stand on their own. She declared that the time of silence was over and that the galaxy must now decide whether to live in fear of truth or in strength beside it. The chamber roared with voices and the conclave shook with decisions, yet through the chaos, one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer a myth, and the lie that had bound the stars was unraveling before every eye. The shattered silence. The conclave had never witnessed such uproar. Entire delegations shouted over one another, voices of fury, hope and disbelief colliding in a storm that seemed to shake the walls of Auralis. The witness seed still glowed in Sayla's hands, casting pale fire across the chamber as if demanding no one look away. Harmony's representatives stood at the center of the storm, their faces carved into masks of denial. They insisted the visions were manufactured illusions. They demanded sanctions against Sayla and Cade, and they ordered the guards to act. Yet the guards hesitated because they too had seen the images of the hidden human vessel cutting through Harmony's fleet. They had heard the transmissions in real time. They had seen the reports streaming across independent channels. The lie was cracking and no order could mend it. Sayla stood tall, though her knees trembled. She was not trained for politics or war, but she was trained for truth. She raised her voice above the chaos, telling the conclave that the evidence was no longer contained in one seed or one station. The proof lived now in the minds of everyone who had seen the visions and in the screams of Harmony's fleet, broken above the colony. She told them that lies could be controlled, but living truth was like fire, and fire always found a way to spread. The chamber fell quieter as her words echoed. Some still doubted, some still clung to Harmony's assurances. But many more now leaned forward with questions rather than accusations. Cade spoke next, his tone sharper. He recounted his own encounters, with hidden escorts on convoy runs and the impossible maneuvers he had seen. He described the silence that always followed any attempt to ask, and the disappearances of those who grew too curious. He told the delegates that this was not a sudden revelation, but a shadow that had stretched across generations, and now the shadow had lifted. The room rippled with uneasy silence because every empire could remember moments in their histories that had never quite added up, and now those cracks found a name. Harmony's leaders grew desperate. They tried to redirect blame onto smugglers and rebels. They accused Sayla of working with conspirators to destabilize the Order of the Stars, yet the tide had already shifted. Delegates from smaller empires spoke in her defense, demanding open investigation. Some from ancient neutral orders called for Harmony's immediate censure and a tribunal to uncover the truth. The balance of the chamber leaned further with every heartbeat, and Sayla realized that the empire which once commanded obedience now stood cornered by its own arrogance. Then the witness seed flared one final time, projecting not a vision of the past, nor a live broadcast, but the presence of something greater. The air in the chamber thickened as if the station itself leaned closer. A voice filled every mind, not belonging to Sayla nor Cade, nor the sentinel of the station. It was human, calm, and steady. It spoke of choice. It said humanity had left not to abandon the galaxy, but to give it space to grow. It said they had watched silently through the ages, waiting for the moment when the galaxy would no longer shatter under the weight of their presence. The voice declared that moment had come. Humanity would no longer remain only in shadows, but neither would they seek thrones. They would walk as guides, as equals, as witnesses to the rise of others. Delegates wept openly. Others shouted in awe. Harmony's leaders faltered, their last defenses collapsing under the undeniable reality. The conclave passed motion after motion, stripping Harmony of exclusive authority and demanding a council of inquiry. Sayla felt the change in the air like a storm breaking. The empire that had silenced truth was undone by the very truth it feared most. After the chamber emptied and the noise dimmed, Sayla sat alone with Cade in a quiet alcove. The witness seed no longer glowed with unbearable intensity, but with a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and alive. She asked him if he believed humanity would truly return. Cade smiled faintly and said they never left. Not really. They had been in every gap, in every silence, in every strange moment of guidance. They had been shepherds waiting for the flock to grow strong enough to see them again. Sela looked out through the glass walls of Oralis at the nebula swirling beyond. It no longer felt like an ocean of fire and shadow, but like a dawn vast and unmeasured. She thought of her old desk in the archive, the dust and the silence, the endless records and the holes where something greater had always been. She knew she could never return to that life. The galaxy had changed, and she had changed with it. She had carried truth across darkness and seen it ignite like a flame that no empire could smother. Cade placed his hand on her shoulder, reminding her that their journey was not over. The Conclave might know the truth, but truth was not the same as acceptance. There would be battles, still words, and weapons, both. Yet for the first time in generations, the galaxy was no longer living inside a cage of silence. It was living in the echo of humanity's choice. The witness seed pulsed again, and for a fleeting moment, Sela saw a vision, not of war or exile, but of a hand reaching across stars, offering not command but kinship. She closed her eyes and let the warmth settle in her heart. The lie that humans never existed was gone, and from its ashes a new story would rise, not of shadows, but of voices walking. Together she whispered into the quiet that peace was not silence, peace was the chorus of many songs joined freely. And in that moment, she knew the galaxy would never again be the same. The dawn of truth. The station of Oralis carried the weight of history in its halls, yet now it carried something greater than decrees or alliances. It carried the rebirth of truth. The witness seed rested in Sela's hands, glowing no longer with the fire of revelation, but with the warmth of promise around her. The chamber stood emptied of its chaos, yet its echoes remained. She could almost still hear the shouts of disbelief, the gasps of awe, the furious protests of Harmony's envoys, and the quiet weeping of those who realized the lie that had shaped their entire lives was breaking. Cade stood beside her, silent but steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon of stars that stretched beyond the glass walls. The voice of humanity had spoken, not as conqueror, not as ruler, but as guide and witness. That voice had reminded the galaxy that strength was not in silence but in choice. It had reminded them that the path forward was not built on fear, but on courage. The empires that once hid behind the false comfort of Harmony's lies could no longer deny the truth, for they had seen it and felt it themselves. Humanity had existed, humanity still existed, and the galaxy could no longer pretend otherwise. Sela thought of her old desk in the archive, the endless rows of records, the careful silence, the neat patterns of lies disguised as order. She thought of how she had once believed she would spend her life guarding words but never speaking them. She smiled softly now because she understood that the task of a keeper was not just to store truth, but to carry it where it was most needed. She had carried it through storms and chases and halls of power, and now it burned too brightly to be hidden again. Cade broke the silence with a quiet promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. There would be resistance still. There would be those who clung to the old order, who sought to twist fear into chains again, but there would also be allies. There would be voices rising now, voices that had been waiting for the moment to speak and to sing together. Humanity had lit the fire, but it was the galaxy that would decide what to build in its light. The nebula outside shifted colors in great waves of crimson and gold and violet, and to Sela it no longer looked like chaos. It looked like dawn. She pressed the witness seed to her chest and felt its rhythm match her own. She whispered to the stars that peace was not silence. Peace was not obedience. Peace was the courage to face truth and still choose to walk together. She closed her eyes and let the warmth settle into her heart. The silence that had once smothered the galaxy was broken forever, and from that silence rose something new, a dawn that could not be erased. The story of humanity was no longer buried. It was alive, again carried not by myth but by memory, choice, and fire. The end.